Okay, so thank you, John, very much for doing this. We've got a series of questions that we're going to ask you, and I'm going to kick things off straight away. So the first one's from John Morris at Triton Exec. And his question for you is, in those moments when the anxiety comes in as a thought arrives, as much as it is an overwhelming and a horrible feeling, it's also one that seems justified in your mind for that moment. Therefore, it feels wrong to use a trick or technique to push it away, as there is a sense of having to allow this feeling to be there to warn me about something I'm concerned about. So what do you say to that? Surely, if one was always able to find a sense of calmness, you would never feel emotions of your heart.
I was with you until the very last statement. I'm not sure that the last statement is true. But yeah, we're not trying to push anything away, and we're trusting those feelings, and we're basically putting out the welcome mat for those feelings and not trying to push them away or idealize some kind of special state where we can just be infinitely equanimous. But we can be aware of how unequanimous we are and how much we're hurting and how much we're lost or confused. And so the real challenge here is, as soon as you recognize it, then you realize that even the words, I'm lost, I'm confused, I'm hurting, that those are thoughts about experience, but you can hold all of that in awareness, and then you can ask this interesting question, which is not about dissociating from your feelings or thoughts, but recognizing that you have a whole other way of holding them that doesn't eclipse other possibilities for well-being and for doing important things in the world. And that is, you can ask yourself the question, is my awareness of my anxiety or my anger or my sadness or whatever it is that's gobbling me up at the moment, is my awareness of it angry or sad or, frightened? And you'll discover that it's not, that it's kind of like a mother holding her child, where the child is very, very upset, but the mother holding the child doesn't have to fix anything, make it go away. You just go with the flow, but stay in the love or stay in the awareness. And then it evolves by itself into not just going away, but we're changed by the process of holding both the wanted and the unwanted and the neutral stuff that we usually never even notice, holding it all in awareness without having to push it away or pursue it or do anything with it. And in that sense, we're learning how to inhabit this hidden dimension of reality called human awareness that actually can do a huge amount of work when it's aligned in sort of ethical foundation of non-harming, including non-harming yourself with all your negative thoughts and depressive thoughts and anger often turned inward, or feeling inadequate, I'm not good enough. So this is in some sense a profound opportunity for healing, which in my working definition of healing, it's not fixing, it's not curing, it's not making anything go away, but rather it's coming to terms with things as they are. Right in this moment, not some kind of thought-based coming to terms with things as they are, but more that mother embracing the child, her child kind of way. And you practice that over and over and over again. Every time the mind goes off, you bring it back in some way or other. And over time, you learn to default to a kind of wisdom, a kind of equanimity, a kind of stillness that sees things larger. So we're at a time when everything is going to pieces. I mean, or you could build stories of yourself about everything going to pieces. And you can ask, is that actually true? Or has everything always been going to pieces in a certain way all through human history? And yet, all sorts of good can happen. And then you can begin to experiment with or play with, how can I align myself to optimize well-being, not just for myself, but for the world, and minimize harm and hurt and suffering, not just for myself, but for the world.
All right, this next question comes from Constance Poraska. Hello, I am an MBSR teacher in Wichita, Kansas. I love the program and will continue to teach it. Wichita is just the right size to spread mindfulness faster. I have had many contacts at the YMCA businesses, the Leadership Center. Would it be possible to do a smaller train the trainer type of mindfulness that would spread and change so many lives? The champions who appear could continue to study deeper. The state of the world now is desperately crying for mindfulness. Would you be willing and available to develop a program like this? Imagine if more people moved from their heart. I live in the heart of America. Kindest regards.
Wow. Very beautiful. Well, the short answer is yes. Anything that you can do that's authentic and grounded in real practice of mindfulness. And that's a big proviso, because a lot of people don't actually understand the full dimensionality of mindfulness, but they want to teach it. And so the motivation very often is not completely pure in a certain way. But if you feel that you're ready to, in some sense, train other people how to do this within one framework or another, then absolutely, that's how the wisdom actually moves in the world. We are conduits in a certain way for wisdom. But it's also important that you receive, as you're doing this, from people who may be much more experienced or have much longer meditation practices and have already worked in those kinds of domains before, so that you don't get lost. Mindfulness is like a, sort of very easy to turn it into a cognitive behavioral kind of therapy, which would destroy the non-dual dharma elements of it that are absolutely at the core of this. And of course, if you don't know what I even mean by those words, non-dual dharma elements of it, then a lot more work on your part is in some sense required to study with teachers that will really give you the kind of foundation to be able to authentically move this dharma perspective and embodied dharma perspective in the world in a way that will be maximally beneficial. So it's a lifetime's engagement, and I wouldn't be in any hurry to actually build something that provides professional training, for instance, because there are already some very, very credible professional training programs out there for MBSR. If it's not MBSR that you're doing, but something kind of modified or whatever, of course, then it's really important not to call it MBSR, because that confuses the scientific study of MBSR if we don't even know what MBSR is anymore, because everybody says that it's whatever they're doing. So you can do whatever it is that you like, but please don't call it MBSR or mindfulness-based anything else, like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy or mindfulness-based childbirth and parenting, or all of those various scientifically studied programs out there. But avail yourself for sure of all of the professional groups that are actually training in those areas, because this really is a lifetime's engagement. And believe me, I mean, I've been practicing for almost 55 years and I feel like a beginner. So a very big part of this is not knowing too much. I mean, you want to learn to cultivate don't know mind, as one of my Korean Zen teachers calls it, and to be really modest in what you think you know, but don't be afraid of sharing what you love. And I think that will give you a kind of good guardrails for not losing your way as you try to further this kind of practice in the world, in the Midwest, in places where, as you say, your community can really, really, really benefit from it. Now, that said, there's no one right way to do this. Just there's no one right way to practice mindfulness. There are an infinite number of wrong ways, so you have to be careful. But there's no one right way. So the more you drop deeply into your own experience and draw on everything that you know from whatever your professional background and training is and everything else, the more you will supply the world with exactly what your neighborhood of the world really needs, and probably needs most, because you have your finger on the pulse of your community. And yes, you do have to train other people, because basically everybody needs this. So there aren't enough teachers of mindfulness, but you have to be very careful that you're not teaching some kind of denatured version of where the only authentic aspect of it is the word mindfulness, but nothing stands behind it that's authentic. And that's a big challenge.
Thank you. Our next question, John, is from Reshmi Aaron. I've been doing MBSR since February this year. It has brought much relief, but some days or events trigger such overwhelming emotions, which no matter how much mindfulness or breath awareness I bring, the feelings don't go away. They pull me down. I feel like they're choking me and I have no control on them. What does one do?
They're not supposed to go away. So you've already, in some sense, not only answered your own question, but solved your own problem. Because it's not a problem. That's like saying there's a thunderstorm out and I don't like thunderstorms. What should I do? You're not going to stop the thunderstorm. And the more you try to stop the thunderstorm that's going on in your own mind or your own head or your own body, the more you're going to get into trouble of one kind or another. Because when you go into battle with reality, you know who always loses? You. So the more you can align yourself with recognizing that mindfulness is not about getting anywhere else, but actually learning how to be with things as they are, good, bad, and ugly. And then holding that in awareness without having to fix or pursue anything at all, as long as you're doing it ethically so that you're not harming anybody else or yourself, then patience can arise. You can actually realize right now, maybe this is the right response to the atmospheric conditions in my own mind or in my own life, and I don't have to fix anything or pursue any thought-based goal for now, just for now, and then live in that now comfortably. And then the next moment of now is going to be very different if you choose that path. And then, of course, you're practicing in this kind of open-hearted, spacious way, and new arrivals, new arisings can appear that wouldn't have appeared before, because you were locked in to a certain kind of unfortunate sort of pattern, like a whirlpool in water, that the whirlpool doesn't have any actual real reality. It's just water turning in space, okay? But if you get caught up as a twig in the whirlpool, you can go down. But if you are patient and ride with the waves and the forces of the whirlpool, it dissolves. Yes. It's actually pure emptiness. So as soon as the mind creates a problem, then you have a problem. But if the mind just stays open and sees things as they are, underneath our thoughts about them and our liking and disliking, which is the practice, that's the exercising of the muscle, moment by moment by moment, then actually new opportunities and insights can arise where we can actually let our doing come out of this domain of being that we're learning to inhabit, and it will be an entirely different doing and much, much healthier. So in a sense, what I've just described defines being healthy in relationship to our own thoughts and emotions, and for that matter, difficult body experiences.
Yeah. So very quickly, Jon, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf them. Is that one of your genuine expressions? Because I see it everywhere with your name.
Yeah, I know. If you look on the web, you'll find
everywhere. It's everywhere. Is that a Jonism?
No, I took it and I quoted it in Wherever You Go, There You Are, from a yoga teacher, Indian guru named Swami Satchitananda, who was really a fabulous character. Mm-hmm. And actually it's from a poster of this, 70 plus Indian, guru on a surfboard. And underneath is the caption, you can't, with his flowing robes and white beard and white hair.
We need to find that. Yeah, we need to find that.
You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And I just quoted it. And then because I quoted it, and of course attributed it to Swami Satchitananda, but then people just grab it off the internet and say that
it's an easy soundbite to grab. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, thanks for that clarification. All right, I think we maybe 2-3 more questions. All right, so Jonathan, if you may, with the next one.
Right, this next question comes from Sue Cummings. It's a simple question that I sometimes wonder about. When I'm meditating, I sometimes enter a dream-like state. Is this part of the process? I don't fall asleep per se. I'm still sitting erect, but it's a pleasant feeling, dreamlike.
Everything that arises is, Sue, everything that arises is a part of the process. But it does help if you have at times some kind of guidance in how to deal with that. So I really appreciate your question. So when you're aware that you're kind of in this dreamlike state, as you put it, is your awareness in the dreamlike state? So you can look at that in the same way as you might bring awareness to pain or emotional, pain, and ask yourself that and investigate. So it's not like we're trying to establish any desirable or undesirable state and then hold on to it, but to notice that everything changes. So if you watch this state for some period of time, you'll see that it too is impermanent and it's not who you are. And the knowing of that is like obvious because your awareness sees immediately that it's just a thought construct or some kind of dream. You don't know how to describe it. It may have some emotional charge, but it's just an appearance. So things come and go. And as I said, they're impermanent. So awareness just holds it without making anything of it. So that's a kind of guiding principle that might be helpful, is to not make anything of the experiences that arise during your meditation practice, because they're the same as the experiences that arise when you're not meditating. Mm-hmm. And when we learn how to sort of not push away or not pursue any of it, but then we're cultivating equanimity, and then you all of a sudden realize, like, hey, there's no difference between sitting down and meditating and just living my life, because I'm still aware, moment by moment. So the real curriculum here is to live your life moment by moment as if it really, really, really mattered, rather than to sleepwalk through it, as we mostly do when we're on autopilot, reacting to this, that, and the other thing, and wanting this, that, and the other thing, and pushing away whatever it is that we don't want. Yeah. And so that's why the metaphor that I use of exercising the muscle, of course, we'll fall into this state and that state, And none of it is what you're looking for, but all of it is what you're looking at. And when you see it for what it is, then as St. Francis, famous for having said, I believe, what you're really looking for is who is looking.
So, like, do you use the word awareness and observer and witness interchangeably? Because I see you stick to the word.
Oh, I'm so glad I'm so glad you're asking me that question, Guy. That's a kind of, I'm so glad you're asking me that question. I never use the word observer, and I never use the word witness, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do use the present participles, observing and witnessing. Okay,
Right.
and there's a huge distinction here, and it has to do with reifying or making something of a process that's not personal. So when we say I'm breathing, for instance, we don't know who the I is referring to.
Right.
But if I were to ask you, raise your hand if you're breathing, everybody out there, you'd all say, of course I'm breathing, and you'd raise your hand. But frankly, if it were up to you to be breathing, as I like to say, you would have died a long time ago.
Yeah.
You're totally unreliable to be the breather.
Yeah.
You know, you're so distracted. You get a text or this or that or the other. Whoops, dead. So the biology of it doesn't, the phrenic nerve and the brainstem and the diaphragm, you're not allowed anywhere near the actual apparatus that keeps you breathing, because you can breathe right through your sleep.
Yeah.
So who's breathing becomes a really important question.
Yes, yes.
So if you make an observer or a breather or a meditator, okay, or a witness, you're making an identity.
That ego, that is.
You're making you're reifying a subject.
Yeah, you're bringing in a variable that isn't, now there's the facts.
Yeah, you're creating a separation between the subject and the object.
Yeah, okay.
The observer and the observed.
And do you call that duality or non-duality? Or
that's dualism.
So so it's not non-dualism, it's dualism.
Dualism. The
Okay,
non-dualism, I'm so glad you're asking this. The non-dualism is when you catch yourself in the dualism and you realize that it's like a magnet. You know, it's got a South Pole and a North Pole, but it's one magnet.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't get into like, I just want to cut the magnet in half and just take the North Pole. I don't want the South Pole.
Yeah.
Sorry, it doesn't work that way. They inter-are. So there's no subject and object.
Yes. But when you're, for example, doing a meditation and and the thought arises and you use the words observing the thought, should that be used in more metaphorically, because you're being the awareness
because it's a present participle, you can't use it to reify an observer. So I'm talking to a being, so to speak, who is capable of observing, but you don't have to make it like I'm doing it, I'm meditating, I'm observing, because awareness has the observing function built in.
Yes.
It's like no you that making that happen, but we haven't been taught that in school. So we don't realize that we have a whole other form of intelligence that goes way beyond and is much bigger than thinking. Thinking is a fabulous genius kind of superpower, you know, intelligence.
Yeah.
But what about awareness? That's even a bigger superpower, because it can take any thought, including how big the universe is or the multiverse is and how complicated, and you can.
It removes us from the equation.
You can do, you know, whatever you want, you know. So, and when all is said and done, all of that can be held in awareness effortlessly without having to even go to school.
It brings it all in, the simple axiom. In its truest form. It's not
exactly. So then you see you have observing with no observer.
Witnessing,
and
but it's awareness.
If I'm guiding a yoga session, for instance, I won't say lift your right leg or lift your left leg or breathe in, because then I'm using what's called an imperative tense, and I'm using command language.
Imperative tense, yeah.
Yeah, imperative, where I'm using command language that basically says, I'm here, you're there, you do this. Okay, so that's robbing people of their own autonomy in a certain way. Subtly, they may not notice it. Of course, the military uses that in big time. But if we're all lying on the floor and I say, breathing in, I mean, I'm not commanding anybody to breathe in. It's like you're going to breathe in sooner or later because the phrenic nerve and the diaphragm and the brainstem are going to do it for you. And the same with the breathing out, and the same with lifting the leg. How do you know how you're lifting the leg? I mean, at a certain point, the leg just lifts, and we have the kind of conceit that we're doing the lifting, but we have no idea how we're doing that lifting. So what I'm trying to point to is this non-dual domain of understanding that who we think we are is not who we are. So the self, the one that says, I am the observer, that is actually a form of delusion.
And do you
reifies
the ego as well?
It reifies a subject.
Yeah.
And mindfulness is a non-dual meditative gateway.
Yes.
So the more something comes up, this is why I think the Buddha once famously said, and I'm paraphrasing, that all of his teaching could be encapsulated in one sentence.
Yeah.
And I like to say, on the offhand chance that that might be true, maybe we should memorize the sentence, even if we don't understand it. And the sentence is, nothing is to be clung to as I, me, or mine. And the verb is to cling. So that's to self-identify, to sort of make something of the I, the me, and the mine, these personal pronouns.
Yes.
So when we begin to understand the non-reifying nature of the personal pronouns, the non sort of any kind of turning them into some kind of unchanging fact, but that they're just pointers towards a kind of ongoing, continually changing universe that we use the word self to describe.
Yeah.
Then we can begin to understand what it really means to be, and then how we use language, dualistic language, like I'm me, I'm myself, which actually can, if we're not aware of it, function as a prison. If we're aware of it, then of course, conventionally, you don't say, well, I can't go home because it's not my house. You don't lose your mind in that particular way. Although that's, some people do, where they go off the deep end of meditation and they don't know how to distinguish between absolute and relative reality. So we're talking here about the sort of deep nature, the deep structure of reality and the deep structure of the self. And there I've even used the word the self. Knowing that whatever we say is the self. It's like one of those whirlpools I mentioned earlier.
Exactly,
yeah, it's real, but it's also empty of any kind of intrinsic permanent nature.
Yeah, it's funny how you say that, because when you write certain comments in the Facebook group, someone will point you out, you said that word, where even though the intention was that, because you slip up on a word where you kind of, you include the I or the self in a certain way. You'll get people jumping in.
Well, it's good that people are catching us.
It's easy to forget, though.
Slip up.
Yeah. The idea is there.
So there's a certain way in which mindfulness is requiring us to be mindful of how we language things.
Yes.
And notice I'm even using the word language as a verb, and I do that a lot.
How we
language things.
Yeah.
Okay, because you can language them totally dualistically. Or you can conventionally realize that we have to, in some sense, use the language of I, me, and mine, and self, and so forth. But we can actually language it in ways that point to our recognition that it's empty of any kind of reality. It's just a conventional kind of a convention that we agree upon, but that it's not a core reality.
Yeah.
Is this making sense to you?
No, absolutely. I think we should do another podcast where we just go deep on the non-duality, when we talk about
Hey,
awareness
you know,
versus
you made me very
observation.
happy asking that question. You could see that.
Yeah, because I think there's, especially when you've been meditating for a while, these are genuine questions that pop up into your mind. And when you're trying to explain it to someone and they, you know, they bring up, well, you know, awareness versus observing versus the witness. Well, why is there a distinction? You know, what is the umbrella term and why is that important?
Yeah, and I
And that
think we
helps.
just answered it.
Yeah,
I
yeah, we
think
did, absolutely. But I think
we just
we,
answered that.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And thank you so much for doing that. But, you know, I would love to like dig your brain on a lot of these subjects where it's more,
Well,
not
by all means,
esoteric, but it's like, well, we take it and we just go a bit, when we talk about the word ego, because a lot of people use it to mean, oh, you're being egotistical in a more of a narcissistic kind of selfish way, versus the idea that you're actually considering yourself as a physical form versus, you know, this consciousness that's connected with everything, right? And what does that mean? And is that even true? And just kind of like talk about it, you know, and just explore some of those conversations, you know, that I think that would be fascinating.
I'm happy to do that once or
Yeah.
twice a year. I'd be happy to do
Yeah.
that with you. I mean, and again, you just asked probably the most important question of all. And if people are not entirely understanding of the answers that I've given, and I've given multiple sort of approaches to it, that's okay, because this is something that the thinking mind alone will never figure out, because the thinking mind is limited. But if you hold the not knowing in the awareness and be the knowing that the not knowing actually is, and I know that sounds like insane talk, but
I've heard you say it many times. So
even knowing that the not knowing actually is, then you'll understand something about the power of awareness.
Yes.
Because knowing what we don't know is really wisdom. And it can give rise to incredible creativity and works of imagination when you just trust that it's all available to you. I won't say it's all inside you, because I don't want to make a boundary between inside of you and outside of you, really. Because in a certain way, you're a product of the whole universe.
Exactly.
And you're not, all of us are, and we're not that explainable. But between life and death, or between birth and death, we have an incredible opportunity to actually wake up and realize the full dimensionality of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And it's a very brief opportunity.
Yes. So before I hand it over to Jonathan to see us out with the last question, do you see, like, when you explain mindfulness, like almost like trying to explain quantum mechanics to someone that isn't aware of what quadratic equations are or what algebra is? So before we can talk about algebra, we need to understand the axioms of like a plus b equals b plus a, and, you know, the simple mathematics. Because like when I try to explain mindfulness to someone that's never practiced it before, it's like trying to explain, I mean, do you see it akin almost to something like an issue of communication? Because, you know, you could tell the smartest minds, you know, the depths of knowledge and learning from your years of experience in exploring the laboratory of your own mind and mindfulness. But then without someone having actually experienced that first step of, oh, wow, just to sit with your thoughts and just to realize some of the chaos and the repetition and the randomness. And then without that, you know, the struggle of being able to explain them, you know, some of the stuff that we learn later down the road. I mean, is it necessarily you have to like stand on each previous block in order? And if you haven't stood on those blocks, that the ability to truly get, when you're talking about non-duality or awareness versus witnessing and observation, that without those steps beforehand, you are unable to appreciate. Yeah, you're unable to appreciate. And even if we explained it all day long the vernacular where you understood every word, but without really having experienced those earlier stages, and I don't want to call them stages like there's a process or something, but there's almost like without going through the wonders of all that, for you to, it's like quantum mechanics. No, you need to understand quadratics first, and then basic algebra, and then, you know, you know, multiplication, addition, etc.
You should be teaching yourself all this stuff.
Well,
I mean,
that's what
really,
I'm going
that's
to.
beautifully said. Look, some people actually talk about meditation as kind of like the Hubble Space Telescope. That if you really want to look into the deepest nature of the universe, and the deepest nature of the human mind, there's nothing more powerful at the moment than the Hubble Space Telescope, yes. Except soon there'll be the James Webb Space Telescope, which will make the Hubble look like, you know, child's play. Yeah. But with meditation, with mindfulness, that's the Hubble, that's the practice is the Hubble telescope. So so without reifying now the Hubble telescope, what you're saying and what you're intimating is that this is so deep that it's like, hey, what kind of preliminaries do you need? And in certain traditions, there's all sorts of stages and preliminaries that you go through before you progress through various kinds of stages. And that's one very venerable tradition of teaching wisdom or mindfulness or meditation. But I have not followed that route. I go much more with the non-dual Zen or Chan tradition in China, where it's beyond name and form, and it's beyond all the written instructions and sutras and commentary and all that. Direct perception, transcending name and form. Okay, direct transmission. It's called outside the teachings. Yeah. The direct perceiving beyond name and form. So that's something we're born with. Yes. And we can help each other to develop, because it's an arduous practice to wake up. Yeah. It's not like, yeah, thanks for telling me, breathe in, breathe out. Now I'm free from all of my suffering and the causes of suffering. This is like a lifetime's work, at least. Yeah. And so, many people can study the stages because everything's available on the internet now, and there are phenomenally wonderful teachers out there in all of the various, Tibetan schools and in different schools of Buddhism. But most people are not going to understand that. Yes. And it will take them 20 lifetimes to kind of get up to the quantum mechanics, so to speak. Do you know what I'm saying? Or the Hubble Space Telescope. And the irony is that they're already the Hubble Space Telescope. Every single one of us is. Exactly. So these are some of the kind of interesting ways in which the Dharma, or the lawfulness of the universe, is made available to a wide range of different kinds of temperaments and people in different stages of life in different places in the world. Yeah. And some people will be attracted to, mindfulness with me, and other people will be repelled by mindfulness, as Jon Kabat-Zinn talks about it. But they'll find somebody else that says, this person makes total sense. Yes. Yeah. And it doesn't matter which door you go into, because they're all different doors into the same room. Yes. And we're all just beginning. We're all like not even in kindergarten. This is daycare. But we got to go through some door and then, enjoy the daycare and see what emerges. Yes. So I'll tell you what, perhaps in like May, June next year, I'm going to set up a session where I'm going to come at you hard with some of these questions. And I'd love, this has been fascinating. I mean, I have to say, this has been fascinating. So let's shoot for like May, June of next year. With me, as far as I can project out into the future. Yeah. Just give me time to work on something. But I'm open to that, Guy. Let me just say I'm open to that. And I feel like I don't know how many people, will be interested in that kind of thing. But if you're interested in it, I'd be happy to just trust that. Yeah. And it's like, how many people are interested in quantum mechanics? Doesn't mean there's any less relevance or it's not any less true, right? Totally. But no matter how esoteric a subject is, doesn't take anything away from it. And I think it's also important to say that even the greatest Nobel laureates in quantum mechanics they don't actually understand quantum mechanics either.
Yeah, but not to say that just because you're there doesn't mean you got it. Maybe you're just there to an infinity or to an infinite amount of knowledge,
math
right?
itself, people tell me, reveals certain aspects of the nature of the universe,
Yeah,
that are very, very hard for the human mind to grasp, because we're so based in time and distance, and we measure distance by time.
yeah.
So, and when you get down to the Planck length, 10 to the minus 33 meters, I think it is, space and time themselves dissolve. And so the mathematics, as I understand it, not being a mathematician or a physicist, all of a sudden becomes problematic. And one of the problems is that, like, it's very hard to reconcile that with what we understand about space being, in some sense, gravity.
Yes.
Gravity and space, the gravity shapes space, or we don't even know what space is.
And how it bends, it's like,
And of course, gravity shapes, bends space.
Yes.
But what about at the 10 to the minus 33 meters? So, yeah, these are all like fascinating doors into the nature of reality. And I think it's important to say that, the quantum mechanicians, so to speak, are as mind blown by this whole thing, if not more mind blown by it, than anybody else.
Yes, yeah.
And one more thing, it took 100 years exactly from between Einstein's general theory of relativity and the prediction that that space itself would vibrate if there was enough gravitational energy, like colliding colossal black holes would send out vibrations in space. And 100 years after he did the math, and at the first, hardly anybody understood what that general theory was really pointing to. And then they developed two incredible observatories, telescopes, but that are not actually looking at light, but that are actually measuring distance. And they actually detected 2,000 miles apart those gravitational waves that were like from colliding black holes billions of years ago. And by the time they got to Earth, they detected changes in length of like, I don't know, less than the width of an atom, maybe the width of an electron. But they had two observatories, so they knew it wasn't noise because they got the signal at both at the same time. Now, for human beings to do that, simply mind-blowing. It costs a lot of money, by the way, and thousands of people working together to do one thing. So maybe that's not the most important thing for us in the 21st century, is to detect gravity waves. Maybe the most important thing is to figure out how to not destroy ourselves on the planet in the next 50 or 100 or 1,000 years. But it shows that when we set our minds to do something, money's not a problem, physics isn't a problem, intelligence isn't a problem. We can do it. And I take a lot of heart from that, a lot of optimism from that.
All right, Jonathan.
Okay, Jonathan.
Take us home. Take us home.
Oh man, how do I follow all of that? That's what you say in the music world. Well, again, John, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been such a joy. I don't have a lot of questions. I mean, the one that I had sort of floating today is kind of goes along with what you guys were talking about. So, John, without having any sort of goal to achieve any enlightened state or greater level, again, like we're talking about, yet having a dedicated, ongoing daily practice, is it actually possible to I've heard different teachers out there say things like, we've heard like develop a mind that clings to nothing. I've heard just different teachers like Eckhart Tolle, for example, mention, claim to have dissolved the ego. And really is the question here, at the end of the day, Jon, is it our attachments to our opinions that's really preventing us from getting out of our own way?
You just answered your own question. You don't need to ask me that question. Develop a mind that clings to nothing. Another translation of that is develop a mind that abides nowhere. Okay? So that's a definition of awareness. It's not like you even have to develop it. What you're developing is access, reliable access to it, because you've got it. It's part of your truest nature. There's no improving on awareness. You can't go to school to be more aware.
Yeah.
You've got it, baby.
Yeah.
The question is, so actually, that line, develop a mind that clings to nothing, is, do you know where that's from? The story of
I
it?
remember you speaking about it during the 13 weeks, but maybe you could explain again.
Well, it had a very powerful effect on my life, because that is the story. And of course, it's probably apocryphal, but it goes back to Tang Dynasty, China in the 700s. Okay, and this young monk, illiterate, was working in the kitchen pounding rice in a big monastery with hundreds of monks and so forth, all Buddhist monastery in China. And somebody walked by the window reciting the Diamond Sutra. And that line is from the Diamond Sutra, develop a mind that clings to nothing.
Mm.
And it's said that in that moment, this he was a kid, he was like a teenager. That one sentence just did it for him. He didn't do anything. He didn't try to do anything or to realize anything, but it just, the language that's often used is it just broke his mind open. It broke his mind open.
Love that. I love that.
And there's a whole story about it, which I won't go into, but it's really beautiful to prove because of course they have to test your understanding. So so the head monk goes and posts something about his understanding to receive the robe and the bowl of the fifth patriarch, who was the head of the monastery. It was time for the head of the monastery to pass on the mantle to his successor. And that chief monk in the monastery was the one who was, obviously all the monks knew he was like his dharma, his wisdom was the best wisdom. And he posted something, a calligraphy on the wall of the monastery one night, and then the young monk, who was illiterate, couldn't read it, of course, but he had someone else read it for him, and he said, well, could you write out something if I dictated something to you? So he dictated his understanding versus the head monk's understanding and put it up on the wall next to the head monk's. Mm. And it was just a beautiful example of, like, the head monk was saying that I don't remember exactly how it goes, but the mind is like a mirror bright, don't let any dust alight. So it's like beautiful, you keep sweeping the mind, clearing the mirror, and don't let any dust alight. And the young monk, who was illiterate, said, there is no mind, there is no dust, where can anything alight? And, it's like a non-dual reality understanding versus a dualistic understanding. Yeah. So he had to run away from the monastery in the middle of the night. He was given the robe and the bowl by the fifth Chan patriarch, and he became Huineng, the sixth, and sort of, some people would say greatest of the six Zen patriarchs, the last. And then there was a whole lineage that went on for 1,000 years. I mean, still alive, where they chant the names of all of those people who were in the direct succession from Huineng, the illiterate rice pounder.
The illiterate rice pounder.
Yeah. So develop a mind that clings to nothing. And that doesn't mean that you don't care, or that you're not ethical, or that you'll stand by and watch people, sort of commit murder or anything like that, or injustice of any kind. It doesn't mean, it means that you see clearly what's going on. You act on the basis of what you see, but you don't cling to the results.
Yeah.
So you're willing to stand in the fire, in a sense, beyond life and death, beyond time and space. Clinging to nothing, that may be the most beautiful way to express the value of life. Is to not be so afraid of dying that we actually are afraid of living. Or we're not true to ourselves because somebody who's smarter and more well-trained has a better answer, and everybody thinks they're the right person to do the job when they're not. And you may be, if you know what the job is.
Wow. So, Jon, thank you so much for your time. And, Jonathan and I, in our own conversations together, always, just geek out on how fortunate we are to be part of this one beautiful community that your legacy has, has created, and the amount of goodness that it's doing in the world. We just want to keep as true to your message as possible, and as true to your teaching.
And believe me, I feel it. If I didn't feel it, I wouldn't be here. And
for sure.
You know that.
Yeah.
But it's actually been going on with you, Guy, for a long time.
Yeah, about 7-8 years now.
I feel the same. Yeah. I mean, so it's hard to explain this kind of thing. And I think, in all ways, I didn't make any of this stuff up. I have teachers. Everything is basically contributing. I wrote a little book called Letting Everything Become Your Teacher. So none of this is really personal. And we all have debts that are not payable to the people who were our teachers, or the circumstances.
The shoulders of giants, standing on the shoulders of giants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the only way that we can really pay it back is to pay it forward.
Beautiful. I like that. Mm-hmm.
And that's why I do what I do.
Yeah. And you do it so well.
Well, I love you guys. And it's just been so touching. So that, it's quite late for you, Guy, now, and I want to just thank you for the time that you devote to this, and you as well, Jonathan.
It's a pleasure.
Well,
always.
Yeah.
This is the best kind of love. It's like, where we don't take personally what's not personal.
Yeah.
And then we really love it.
Yeah.
And we love the way it's so personal.
Mm-hmm. And it can actually, I'm surprised sometimes how lonely it is, again, bringing the ego involved, but how, when, like I said, not to say that I'm at the quantum mechanics level of it yet, but, at least the quadratics, where there's a certain understanding, and just like, wow, I would love to talk about this, because it's like a philosophy, so I'm talking about life, talking about existence and our purpose. And I just find it's just so nice when I talk with you, Jon, because sometimes there is almost a lack of people that I know in my immediate circle of friends, and that where we can just explore these conversations and to, run ideas past each other. And whereas when you just get to the Instagram and Facebook and the BBC and coronavirus and football and just like the surface level conversations, that when you're able to have a dialogue with someone that's, been through similar challenges, and, the loneliness of just going through the laboratory of your own mind and what you learn from it, and just seeing other people get involved in the community. So it's just lovely to be able to share and just to feel like part of and again, that's what the group is for, to feel part of this community where one can ask these questions and have, people commenting and feeling and learning from each other as well.
But there's another element to it, or let me say another dimension, actually. And I want to point it out to both of you because who you are is doing all the work. If you weren't who you are, the two of you, I would not be here with you. So it's not just what you do that has an influence out there. It's who's doing all the doing. And, you know, from that point of view, you don't need to have conversations about the Hubble Space Telescope and gravity and you know, quantum mechanics and that kind of thing. Sure, that you can eat that up with the people who you can relate to around that when you've got the time. But what is most transmissible, like riffing on the virus, we're doing something that's transmissible.
Yes.
It's the Dharma that's actually transmissible.
Yeah.
Only instead of being virulently, you know, sort of lethal, it's virulently
the
loving.
antonym, yeah.
Loving, the antonym, whatever.
Yeah, whatever that is.
and so that's your strongest suit, is your being and who you are. And people feel that whether you're talking about football or anything else. And of course, Jonathan and I well know that when you're talking about football, you're not talking about the real football.
The real, no, I am.
What we call soccer.
The real,
Right.
We have to disagree on that one, John. And I think that's a beautiful way to end the podcast this evening. And yeah, thank you so much, John.
Listen, and, I love you guys. I mean, I feel really honored myself to be part of this. You're, you know, kind of a lot younger than I am, and I really feel like there's something about this that is really magical.